I couldn't resist the power of this great craftsman. I always thought my life was normal. At home, I lived in a routine, every day almost the same. I'd wake up, make breakfast, watch my husband Mark leave for work, then be alone. Initially, I didn't mind this. I thought this was how life worked. I'd do house chores, watch TV, and let time pass. But as the months went by, I started feeling a void inside me. Something was missing, but I couldn't quite figure out what. My relationship with Mark felt more like a cohabitation. We weren't really a couple. Our conversations were only about simple things, what's for dinner, or don't forget to pay the electricity bill. I could sense something deeper was missing, but I had no idea how to bring it up. Mark seemed perfectly content, and that made me afraid it was just me feeling this way. Honestly, I didn't even know if it was a problem. Was this how all married people felt? I didn't have many friends, and my family lived far away, so my days were filled with a lonely routine. Even on weekends, when Mark was home, I still felt alone. Mark kept himself busy with his hobbies while I sat in a corner, waiting for him to notice me, hoping he'd ask how I was feeling. But he never did, and I never said anything. Somehow, I'd resigned myself to the idea that my life would always be this way, lonely, quiet, and devoid of deep emotions. Eventually, I noticed that my home reflected how I felt inside. Even the well-kept walls started to crack, as if the house itself had grown tired of the monotony. I tried to ignore these feelings, pretending everything was fine, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And it bothered me more and more every day. I had no idea that my life was about to change entirely, and it would all start with a simple home renovation. I had grown tired of the cracks in the walls, the musty-smelling corners, and I decided it was time for a change. Mark agreed but, as usual, left everything up to me. So, I began looking for someone to do the work. A few days later, I found Jack, who was recommended by a neighbor. Jack seemed trustworthy, so I called him to come take a look. When Jack first arrived, I didn't think much of him. He was just a handyman, polite and respectful, immediately showing his professionalism. We discussed what needed to be done, he explained his plan, and gave me a quote. The price seemed fair, and we agreed to start the following week. It was supposed to be a simple renovation without any complications. At first, our conversations were strictly about the job. Jack would arrive early, bring his tools, and start working on the walls. I would stay nearby, checking to make sure everything was on track. Jack always explained what he was doing, showing me any issues he found and assuring me that everything was under control. I liked his way of talking. He was calm and always spoke with a smile. He was different from anyone else I knew, especially Mark, who was always in a rush and impatient. Days went by, and I found myself looking forward to Jack's visits. It wasn't just about the renovation anymore because our conversations had moved beyond the walls of the house. He asked how my day was, how I felt about the renovation, and even shared stories about his life, experiences, and family. Suddenly, I felt like I had someone I could truly talk to, someone who cared about what I had to say. Jack's presence brightened the atmosphere. He wasn't just fixing the house, he was also bringing a new energy that made the home feel more alive. Being around him made me feel good, as if I finally had someone with whom I could share my thoughts and emotions. Gradually, I realized there was something else there, something I couldn't quite explain but that was growing inside me. What had started as a simple renovation began to affect my heart in an unexpected way. I felt an excitement when Jack came by, a nervousness I hadn't felt in years. Our conversations, once just about the house, took on a new tone, small glances, smiles, and an unspoken connection. Something was changing, and I knew it would cause turmoil, but I couldn't deny how I felt when I was with Jack. I spent all day waiting for his arrival. When he was there, it felt like my house took on a new life, a new color. There wasn't just a physical renovation happening, something within me was being rebuilt or perhaps discovered. Our conversations flowed in a way I had never experienced. He spoke so simply yet profoundly, as if he knew exactly how I felt without me saying anything. We began talking about our lives, and unexpectedly, I opened up about my loneliness and how lost I felt in my own home. Jack listened attentively, his gaze always full of genuine interest. He shared a bit about his own life, his family, the jobs he had done, and the simple things he enjoyed in his free time. When I laughed at his stories, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. I didn't know when it happened, but at some point, my feelings changed. It wasn't just sympathy or gratitude for the work he was doing. It was a connection, something stronger than I wanted to admit. Every time our eyes met, my heart raced. It felt as if everything around us disappeared, leaving only that invisible space that connected us. Sometimes, our fingers would lightly touch while he showed me something, and it sent a wave of electricity through me, leaving me confused and excited. I tried to convince myself that it was just a friendship, that I was exaggerating, but as time went on, it became harder to ignore what was happening. The way Jack looked at me wasn't like an ordinary handyman, it felt like he saw beyond the cracks in the walls, as if he could see the cracks inside me that I had tried to hide from everyone, even myself. Jack had a lightness about him that made me forget everything. When he was around, I didn't think about my marriage, my disappointments, or the emptiness I felt. I just thought about him, and I wanted the moment to last forever. The connection between us was undeniable. No matter how hard I tried to fight it, I knew I was getting deeper with each passing day. My desire to be near him grew, and I found myself imagining what it would be like if I gave in to that connection. But I knew it wasn't right. I was heading down a dangerous path, yet I couldn't resist the feeling. Jack brought something into my life that I didn't even know was missing, and now I couldn't live without it. As time went on, Jack's presence filled my thoughts even when he wasn't around. I knew that what I felt for him went beyond simple friendship, and it bothered me. I found myself thinking of him at random moments, while preparing dinner or folding laundry. Everything around me reminded me of him, his laughter, the way he looked at me, even his scent lingered in my mind. The desire I felt was something I could no longer control. I admired his every move as he worked. There was always an intensity in the air when he was around, and I knew he felt it too. Sometimes, our gazes would meet, and in that brief moment, the world seemed to stop. A mix of excitement and guilt gnawed at me because deep down, I knew this was wrong. I had a husband, and I was supposed to have a happy life. But when Jack was near, none of that seemed to matter. The suppressed desire grew stronger. It wasn't just physical, it was my need to be seen, to be desired, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew I had to suppress these feelings, but resisting them felt impossible. Everything in me wanted to be closer to him. Every smile, every shared word fueled the fire inside me, and without realizing it, I was on the edge of a cliff. There were days I stood in front of the mirror, questioning what had happened to me. The reflection staring back at me felt unfamiliar. Where had the selfless woman gone, the one who tried to keep her life in order? I wondered how I had gotten to this point, but at the same time, I loved this new feeling inside me, the adrenaline that rushed through me whenever I thought of Jack. Yet, along with desire came guilt. How could I feel this way about another man? Mark, despite being distant, was a good man and didn't deserve this. I wasn't supposed to desire someone else. But the more I tried to ignore these feelings, the stronger my desire for Jack became. I woke up thinking about him and went to sleep with his image in my mind. I knew I was playing with fire, that I was about to cross a line I couldn't return from, but when Jack came close, all I wanted was for him to look at me like that again, to feel the warmth of his presence even closer. The silent, growing desire was like a ticking bomb, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it contained. When I reached a point where I could no longer hide what was happening inside me, my desire for Jack had grown so intense that it felt like my life was divided into two worlds. On one side, there was the version of me who did everything right, followed the rules, kept the image of a steady marriage and happy life. On the other side, there was the version of me struggling with uncontrollable emotions, a passion growing every day. I looked in the mirror, wondering how I had gotten here. What Jack and I had was just stolen glances and deep conversations, but I knew one thing: I was about to do something that would change everything. Nothing physical had happened, but even thinking about another man, desiring another man, filled me with guilt. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. Though I knew my passion for Jack might be temporary, I wondered if I was really ready to risk everything I'd built over the years. But at the same time, it felt unjust to continue living a life devoid of emotions and passion, especially knowing that feeling more was possible. I knew I was standing at the edge of a precipice. On one side, there was security, the stability of my marriage. If I kept up the appearance, my life would continue the same, boring, maybe, but safe. On the other side was the unknown, the excitement I felt when I was with Jack. But then what? Was I ready to face the consequences of following my heart? My mind told me to forget Jack, to focus on my marriage, and to steer clear of emotions that could lead me astray. But my heart and body told me something else. This was the first time in a long while that I truly felt alive. How could I ignore that? Sometimes, I'd look at Mark and feel even worse. He had no idea what was happening inside me. He went on with his life as usual, unaware of the storm brewing right in front of him. I wondered if he really loved me or if, like me, he was just maintaining an image, living according to expectations. The conflict inside me was unbearable. I felt caught between two worlds, unable to decide which way to turn. And every passing day made the choice more inevitable. I knew I had to decide at some point. Should I continue living a life just for appearances, or should I follow what my heart and desires were telling me? The tension within me began to spill into my daily life. Previously, I could hide what I was feeling, keep things under control. But Jack meant too much to me. I had started to take better care of myself in a way I hadn't done in a long time. I began dressing up more, even when staying at home, choosing my clothes carefully. I wanted to look beautiful, and I knew it wasn't for Mark. I was doing it so Jack would notice me. The way he looked at me, the way I looked at him. When Mark came home, he didn't even notice these changes. He was so used to the routine that he didn't see my new dresses, my different lipstick, or the sparkle in my eyes whenever Jack was around. It was as if he lived in an entirely different world, oblivious to what was happening right in front of him. But it wasn't just my appearance that had changed. I'd also grown more impatient, more distant. Our already sparse conversations became even rarer. I could no longer pretend to be interested in what he said. My mind was always somewhere else, always with Jack. It felt as if my body was there, but my heart and mind were far away, in the place where I truly felt alive. Sometimes I'd try to start a deeper conversation with Mark, but he always seemed too busy or lost in his own thoughts. When I spoke about the renovation, he'd listen half-heartedly, all while playing with his phone or watching TV. It was incredibly frustrating. I wanted him to notice, to ask how I was feeling, but he never did. And then there was Jack. He noticed everything. He'd ask when I was sad, come over when I was quieter, and keep talking until he got a smile from me. Around him, I felt important. It felt like my feelings finally mattered. Every word he spoke took me away from my problems, making me feel even more the emptiness of the life I was living. It wasn't just me that was changing, even the house seemed to reflect what was happening. The renovation was moving along, The walls were gaining a new color, and the once worn-out and lifeless areas were now shining. It felt like my entire life was being renewed along with the house. I wanted to keep pretending nothing was happening, but another side of me, the side that was growing stronger every day, wanted to let it all out, to shout to the world that I had changed, that I was no longer the same. I didn't know if I was ready to face the consequences, but I had reached a point where I couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. Everything hung over me like a cloud filled with desire and uncertainty. Every passing day, I felt closer to making a choice that would change everything. Jack was always there. His smile made me forget the rest of the world. I knew he felt the same, but neither of us had said it out loud. It was all there in the unsaid words, the glances, the soft touches. The hours I spent with him were the best part of my day, and I knew it wasn't normal. I couldn't keep living like this. I was torn between desire and guilt. When Jack got close, my heart would race, and I'd wonder, what if I let it happen? What if I gave in to this passion without thinking about the consequences? But then I remembered my marriage, my husband, the life I had built. I was standing on the edge of a cliff. If I took one more step, there would be no turning back, but the urge to give in to that new feeling, to embrace the excitement, was almost irresistible. Sometimes I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like if I surrendered. If Jack and I overcame all obstacles and gave in to what we felt between us, how would it be? These fantasies made me feel alive but also scared me. And then what? How would I deal with the guilt? What about my marriage? Was I ready to destroy everything I had for something I wasn't even sure about? I knew I was close to making a decision. There was an invisible line between what I felt and what was right, and every time Jack got closer, that line blurred, making it harder to see. The once innocent conversations were now filled with an undeniable tension. Then there was that day when everything almost changed. Jack was finishing an important job in the kitchen, and I went over to ask how it was going. He looked at me in a way that made the ground shift beneath me. The silence that followed was filled with unsaid things, and I knew he was thinking the same thing. For a few seconds that felt like hours, we just stood there, looking at each other. My heart was beating so fast that I thought we could both hear it. And that's when I realized I couldn't go on like this. I had to make a choice. I had to either break this connection completely and focus on my marriage, or give in to these feelings and not look back. The choice seemed impossible, but I couldn't delay it any longer. The pressure inside me was growing every day. I had to decide, and soon. No matter how hard I tried to take control of the situation, deep down, I knew that fate was pushing me in one direction. The tension inside me had reached a point where I couldn't contain it anymore. It was like an approaching storm that I knew would eventually break. With each passing day, I felt Jack closer to me, not just physically, but emotionally. I was on the verge of making a decision that would change everything, and I also felt that I couldn't control what would happen next. Everything came crashing down on an ordinary day. Jack and I were talking in the kitchen, as usual. He was finishing up some work in the cabinet, and I was absent-mindedly watching him, lost in my own thoughts. When he turned to ask me something, our eyes met, and at that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The distance between us seemed to shrink, even though neither of us had moved. Everything around us disappeared, the noise of tools, the sounds from outside, everything was gone. It was just us. And then, without thinking, as if it were the most natural thing, Jack took a step forward. The air grew heavy, and my heart raced so fast I could hardly breathe. I knew what was about to happen, and for a moment, I thought of stopping it, ending the moment before it became irreversible, but I didn't. When he finally touched me, a wave of warmth went through my body. It was everything I wanted and everything I feared. His touch was gentle but firm, bringing all my suppressed emotions to the surface. I was ready to give in, without thinking of the consequences, without caring what would happen next. But just as our lips were about to meet, the sound of the front door opening brought me back to reality. Mark had come home earlier than expected. The moment I heard the familiar sound of the door, I pulled away quickly, my heart still racing. Jack stepped back, visibly tense, and as Mark's footsteps approached, a sense of dread filled me. I couldn't breathe, everything that had happened in the last few minutes vanished from my mind, replaced by overwhelming fear. I turned quickly, trying to act normal, but my body was still trembling. When Mark walked into the kitchen, he didn't notice anything strange. He smiled, talked about work, and then went straight to the bedroom as if nothing had happened. In that moment, I realized this was a warning. It was a sign that I was on the verge of destroying everything. Jack and I exchanged a quick glance, and I knew then that things couldn't continue this way. No matter how strong the desire, no matter how intense the connection between us, the consequences would be devastating. I wasn't ready to deal with them. From that day on, things between Jack and me changed. The tension was still there, but there was a silent understanding that this couldn't go any further. Jack finished his work in the house a few weeks later, and even though our goodbyes were filled with unsaid emotions, we both knew it was for the best to go our separate ways. I never told Mark the truth. He never knew how close I had come to betraying his trust, to destroying everything we had. When the renovation was finished, the house seemed renewed, but I knew there were scars inside me that would take time to fade. The desire was still there, but I was sure I had learned something from this experience. We couldn't always follow our instincts, no matter how strong they were.